Thank you all very much for joining us this evening. My name is Jennifer Macinis. I have a very long title. I'm the Senior Director of Applied Research and Commercialization within the Office of the Vice President, Research and Innovation. Very long title. We shorten it to Funding Sherpa. So it's mine and my team's role within Ryerson to help make connections between the fantastic research and researchers here at the university and people in the community, whether it's people in industry, people in not-for-profits, or people in the utilities that we work with to help move research forward. So to that end, we have events like we're having tonight that bring everybody together to have conversations about areas in which Ryerson is particularly strong and that we're doing a lot of new and innovative research. And sustainable building is certainly one of those areas in which there are researchers from across the university that are undertaking new and exciting work in the fields. And what we've done in tonight's session is kind of vary a bit from our normal mixer standard, where we usually do a kind of speed mixing where you hear 5 researchers speak and then 5 companies speak, to have a kind of mini panel session to talk about some of the issues that are happening in a number of sub-themes around sustainable research. Unfortunately, I have to run to another event this evening, so I'll leave you in very capable hands of Umberto, who's going to act as our host for this evening. But I just wanted to say on behalf of the university, thank you very much for joining us. I know that there's a lot of companies here that we've worked with in the past and have recently collaborated on an NSER Create grant that we're hoping will make it through. But we're very happy to have you here. We have a number of people from the Office of the Vice President, Research and Innovation, as well as a number of different funding partners that are also here this evening that are happy to talk to you about some of the different ways that you can collaborate with the university and can have the government pay for that collaboration, which is always a good thing, and we'll identify the people with the money later on so that you can talk to them. But with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Umberto to act as our MC this evening, one of our resident experts on sustainable building, and have you take it away.
Actually, I know we're running out of time, so thanks for everybody for joining me today. It's been my pleasure, especially it's a pleasure and honor to act as MC this afternoon. The reality of this is that we have been having these mixers since the last few years, and we have been often going around the topic of sustainable building. We did last year a mixer about cement and concrete. We did a mixer about nanotechnology in buildings. We did actually a mixing about ideas. And then I think before the summer, we started thinking about having one about sustainable buildings. And the reality is that this is such a huge, broad topic that really I shouldn't speak at all at this point because we have so many things that we need to discuss moving forward. And in fact, we got a very outstanding answer from the floor. A lot of companies approached us, and we ended up deciding that we were probably going to do a better job by organizing panels. Now, before we move into the panels, and we are going to have a very kind of short amount of time today. The reality is that sustainable building is a huge kind of effort that we are taking at Ryerson as a huge kind of interdisciplinary topic. In reality, we have at least 50 professors in this university that can probably recognize themselves as sustainable building persons. Some of them are clearly in the Department of Architectural Science, but the reality is that a lot of them are in mechanical engineering, civil engineering, business school, looking at the kind of challenge of the real estate aspect of sustainability when it gets applied to the built environment. So the reality is that Ryerson has started recognizing that. It started actually supporting the activity in these kind of areas. Just to give you a sense of this, we just, and many of you probably are part of it, we just applied, is my voice not good enough? So we just applied for a Create kind of project a couple of months ago when Ryerson actually really decided that this was something good to do, and then actually ended putting 700,000 cash from Ryerson. That was kind of pretty amazing for us, especially because we ended realizing that the topic was kind of very well kind of conceived and perceived at Ryerson in the president and vice president for research office, and we were actually recognized among 9 different other universities as the leading institution to do that. We have been working on other initiatives, you see a couple of them, and this is actually just our initiative to give you the sense of the scale and broad approach that we can have when you actually realize that there is actually an university with hundreds and thousands of smart minds, not me, not faculty, really the kids that we are training every single day in this fascinating world. So I'm not going to actually really spend more time. I'm going to tell you a bit of the format. So we're going to have 4 different panels, and the idea is that the first panel is going to be an icebreaker, speaking about sustainable building. Then we're going to get into the meat. We're going to have a second panel about energy efficiency in buildings. We're going to have a third panel about smart buildings, and then we're going to have a final recap panel about resilience and resilience building. So each panel is going to be moderated by a faculty member that has been randomly selected, honestly. We had so many good response, and I apologize in advance for not being able to kind of select all of the kind of standing faculty that have been kind of came out. We are always going to have 1 faculty member and 2 kind of companies. Please apologize also the fact that the 2 companies may be in competition, but we have tried to figure out a way in which they are going to work together through this kind of panel. All the people are going to answer the same series of questions, so we anticipated 4 different questions. They're going to be equal for the 4 panels, so somehow this really serves the scope of giving you the idea how the same 4 questions apply when we speak about energy efficiency buildings or when we speak about smart cities and smart buildings, okay? So that's basically the format that we're going to have tonight, and it's going to be more or less an hour, and we are going to keep all the QA at the end, okay? So that's really something that I strongly appreciate if you could kind of keep in mind those questions to have all the questions at the end of the day. So Margaret Gillespie, the chair of the department, is going to be the icebreaker, moderating the panel of sustainable buildings. And in the panel, we're going to have 2 consulting companies. One is Paul, long-standing, long life-standing friend of the department, representing a bit of the architectural side of designing sustainable building. And then we have having Gonzalo Pedro, that is basically exact role, Gonzalo? Your exact role in RWDI? Just, okay, he wants to be humble, but in reality, it's kind of leading a lot of the activity in sustainable building design of RWDI, which is kind of a nice firm to partner with. So I'm actually invite the 3 of you to please have a seat. And I'm assuming Mark will start by introducing the topic and the panel, and then we are going to have Paul and Gonzalo try to answer these different questions that you see on the screen. And I'm actually going to be the evil guy timing people, okay? So I really apologize also for this, but in 20 minutes we need to move on the second panel.
Ice breaking with time limits.
Okay. Oh, thanks, Umberto. And yeah, it's quite a challenge to get through this, particularly our subject, which is pretty, as you say, the big picture subject. So we're going to get straight stuck in. Umberto's briefly introduced the 2 panelists, so I'm not going to go into more detail. The panelists will say a little bit about their work and their company, just to set the context. And really, I'm going to invite the panelists to choose which of these questions or how they want to address these questions, because we could talk for 20 minutes about each of these questions and more. I just want to set a little bit of context around this subject area from our point of view at Ryerson and from my point of view as a researcher. And I think one of the things that I wanted to highlight is that the subject area of sustainability has been with us for quite a long time. We've been talking about this for a while. I've been working here at Ryerson and trying to bring in more aspects of sustainable building for 15 years and more. I think one of the important things that is really moving forward now is that we need to look at real building performance change, not just things that sound good or that are theoretically directions we want to go in, but we want to actually measure real performance and affect real change. I think a lot of discussion up till now has been very theoretical, and sometimes the real differences haven't occurred as much in buildings. So my interest in some of my research is around, how do we actually make sure that the buildings that we're creating and the buildings that we're working on actually really perform better in terms of energy, in terms of water, in terms of indoor environment, in terms of carbon emissions and all those things. And I think that's an important factor that we need to not lose sight of. I think the other aspect that I would like to throw in and is important in this context is what sort of local solutions are appropriate for us here in Toronto. Sustainability is very much about locally based solutions that are appropriate to our needs, to our systems here, to our availability of materials, to our way that we use our buildings, and even to things that we've done some research work here and things like how do we bring in food systems into the discussion about sustainable cities and so on. So how do we develop locally based solutions that are appropriate to the needs of Toronto? And just to finish my little couple of minutes, I wanted to throw in that we have a huge risk and a huge opportunity in Toronto. With the amount of construction work that we're expecting to happen in this city over the next 25 years or so, with the predictions of the population growth of up to 3 million over the next 25 years, that's the 3 million increase in population in the GTA Golden Horseshoe area. And the resulting amount of building work that's going to happen, new building work and refurbishment of existing buildings, and the focus of, that we need to improve all those existing buildings. We could get it wrong or we can get it right. And if we get it wrong, we're leaving a legacy of even more stuff that needs to be put right. If we get it right, then we have a real strong model of how a city should be evolving in the future. So I just wanted to throw those things into the mix and maybe hand it over to Paul to respond to the questions and to anything that I've said.
Okay, thank you, Mark. My name is Paul Dowsett. I'm the principal architect of Sustainable, where we produce architecture for a healthy planet. And to pick up on what Mark said, the importance is leaving the legacy that he's talking about. Mark has taken a very positive, a very optimistic view that we will leave a legacy. I think the report from the International Panel of Climate Change at the UN has suggested we might not be so lucky as to leave a legacy. So that's the more pessimistic side of the same issue that we might look at. At Sustainable, we look at the 3 points of the sustainability triangle, and we make sure that we keep them in balance. We try to optimize for all of them. And those 3 aspects are environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and financial sustainability. When we look at the work that has been done so far in this arena, we find that too many practitioners have focused on one corner of that triangle, perhaps to the detriment of the other 2 corners. So in our office, we're trying to balance the 3 of them all the time. What we've also learned lately is that, although energy efficiency is a very important thing, really at base what we're getting down to, the thing that we need to count is carbon. Carbon is the element in here that we've got to concentrate on. And I think that we've become, and maybe because we're at the leading edge of this curve, along with Ryerson University, who is also at the leading edge of this sustainability curve, what we've come to realize is that whereas we may think that high performance buildings that emit very little carbon in their operation, we think that's really easy to do. That's not the challenge for us anymore. That's probably the challenge for most of the industry, and it's certainly the challenge for the construction side of the industry. But from the academic, theoretical, and design side, that's not the challenge. The challenge now that we find is how do we eliminate the carbon, the embodied carbon in the construction of the building itself? How do we take care of that? How do we actually make buildings that draw carbon down from the atmosphere? And that involves looking towards nature. It is trees and plants that draw carbon down from the atmosphere, and we need to be creating buildings which operate like plants, so that our buildings are emulating what nature already does so brilliantly, that we are able to draw down carbon, we're able to store that carbon, sequester it away, and then not emit more carbon after that. That's the challenge to us right now as an industry. So I'll leave it there for a moment. I'll allow Gonzalo to take it away, and then we'll maybe come back to the questions.
All right, great, thanks. So yeah, I work for RWDI. We're an engineering and consulting firm. Quite broad spectrum of services, sustainability being one of them. We are about 500 employees worldwide, headquartered in Guelph, of all places, but we have an office here in Toronto. My area is part sustainability. Of course, everything can touch sustainability in essence. My area of expertise is a lot to do with microclimate and how climate impacts building design and master plan design. And I have two challenges that I sort of thought that came to mind when I started thinking about this event. One of them is data. So just recently, RWDI, with a couple of partners, we launched a tool called Compass. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I think it's going to be a bit of a game changer in that it'll allow participants to look and rate their building design relative to a large portfolio of buildings. And right now, it's really geared more to the energy side, but I think one of the potential challenges is how do we expand that kind of approach to things like materials, to other issues that, such as embodied carbon. How do we expand its footprint, in essence, to allow a design team to look a little bit more holistically at building design and not just focus on energy. One of the challenges that come up with this, that rises with this, is in essence, you can actually have an overload of data. It's just so much data. How do you sift effectively through the data to get at the nuggets, those little important pieces of information that'll really be the big levers to your design process? So how do we take that data and effectively inform a design team that is getting together for the first time, sitting down around a table, and starting to think about how they're going to approach the problem? And how do we give them this data in a compelling enough fashion that it guides their design and helps them out? So that's, for me, a big challenge. The other challenge is we have to stop thinking of buildings as single units. And we have to take a step back and understand that we are in an urban context, especially in a place like Toronto. The other thing is we're densifying. And the ultimate effect of densification is that you're going to make people live in smaller spaces. And if you're making people live in smaller spaces, you need to give the option of people to use outdoor spaces. And we haven't given enough thought in the city, in reality in Canada, as to how we design the in-between spaces between buildings, even honestly, even amenity spaces within buildings themselves. I live in a condo, and I can tell you that the space with the pool and the barbecue area is a dead space in the winter. It's closed down. Why is that? The reason it's terrible, it's cold, it's windy, no one wants to be out there. So we really have to start thinking differently about these spaces. When we design them, we have to understand that outdoor spaces are zero carbon spaces, effectively, right? Other than the construction of pavement and things going around it. So this is a huge opportunity that we haven't leveraged. And part of that is just we haven't gone through the process of understanding how we can fold these spaces into the overall design. And this plays out for things like district energy systems and what have you. Really, for me, this is a political, social problem, not so much a technical problem. So we have to think about how we can change perceptions and minds in Toronto, in Ontario, in Canada, to start defaulting to a point where we think about things a bit more holistically and more from a sustainable perspective. That's maybe the third thing, which is a bit more adjacent, is the general public has no understanding of what carbon is and what the cost is associated with carbon. And I think universities and researchers have an important role from an educational perspective, but really from a research perspective, to find ways to inform the general public. Because that's the only way we can get there is by this financial incentive to get to the point where the IPCC won't be shouting at us anymore.
Very interesting that both of you have brought up that this isn't really a technical problem. We know how to do it, but there are other things that are in the way, other barriers. Paul, because I raised the issue of density and how we bring in density. From an architectural perspective, do you want to comment about what are the sort of opportunities, but also the problems around the way that we're introducing density into the city at the moment?
Okay, thanks, Mark. Certainly density is a good thing from an environmental, financial point of view. It's how we look at the social corner of the triangle then that is important. And I don't think that we as an industry are introducing density in a way that makes it socially palatable. I think that's part of the issue. I think you touched on a very important topic. We now need to look at the spaces between buildings as providing all those additional spaces, and of course allowing people to socialize with each other. That's another key aspect. I mean, I compare our North American cities with older European cities, especially cities in Italy. Cities in Italy, the places where people live have always been very small, and their living rooms are the piazza outside, the outdoor spaces, the in-between buildings. I think of the Noli plan of Rome, where Noli drew the buildings as the negative and the spaces in between as the positive space. Just a completely different way of looking at things. We here in North America look at buildings as objects rather than looking at buildings as creating the walls of the outdoor rooms. And I think if we can turn our thinking around to look at those in-between spaces and make them work from a social point of view, that's going to help density go a long way, which is going to reduce every person's carbon footprint accordingly. So I think it's definitely the way to go. It's not a technical challenge, as we've talked about. It's a social challenge now.
Yeah, verticality is not the solution. Going bigger and taller doesn't necessarily get us there.
Yeah, well, I would echo that as well. I mean, I think we assume that in North America there seems to be an immediate assumption that density means verticality, and we don't really examine the other alternatives, of which there are many and very creative and very interesting ones.
Yeah, you can definitely, again, looking at the European cities, they have the same density as we have in Toronto and New York. They have the same density, but their buildings are 6 stories high. They take skyscrapers and lay them down on their sides. It works fine.
So how do we get that message across? How do we actually get that change to happen and this to be something that's considered? It seems to be that it's very difficult to get the development industry to accept that there is an alternative and that there isn't the desire or the ability from the regulators to force this through. So do you see any hope of actually moving this forward in any way?
I do see actually a fair bit of hope. I think for one thing, it's organic. It's already happening. If you see the spaces that are very attractive to people in Toronto, they're not necessarily the ones that are surrounded by condos. They're the ones like Distillery District, Liberty Village, the central area. Even in front of my place, there's the Bentway. And in the winter you put down a skating rink and everyone appears. I mean, so that's organic. The other way is we're doing a fair bit of work on the waterfront, with Sidewalk Labs development. And what we're seeing is a very strong push to creating exactly what you said, which is creating a living room outside. And thinking a little bit more about that interface between the inside and the outside, and creating less of that hard edge where 50 centimeters one way, you're outside, 50 centimeters the other way, you're inside. So rather trying to create a smoother interface between the two and creating a variety of spaces. People crave that because they want that European style experience with a Toronto flair, but ultimately we have to cater to these varying tastes. And if we want to urbanize Toronto further, we have to move in that direction.
One of the buildings that you need to keep your eye on that's being proposed is by an architecture firm from Denmark called BIG, Bjarke project on King Street West, very much taking that European attitude, not stopping at 6 floors, probably something closer to 20 or so, but still in our downtown context at King and Spadina, that's relatively low. And they're creating very interesting outdoor spaces, integrating with historic buildings. And I think that as soon as Torontonians see that there's an alternative to the very, very tall point tower on a podium, I think they're going to give the message with their wallets. People are going to, that building is probably going to sell out ridiculously fast. And the developers are going to see that there is, I think that's the way for the developers to see that there's an alternative to the point tower on the podium, where somebody has to have the courage to build something else.
So we've talked a fair bit about the challenges, and we've identified that the challenges are more political and social. What about the greatest opportunities over the next few years? Just, we have to wrap up in a few minutes, but just maybe summarizing, what do you think are over the next 5 years, do you see the greatest opportunities for moving forward?
There's some exciting things. One, like I said, we have an overabundance of data, which we have to deal with. The other thing is machine learning. There's things coming down the pipeline that we're starting to look at within RWDI that we can start data and machines go well together, and we have to teach machines how to interpret the data for us. So to sift through it, there's a huge potential benefit there that needs to be realized.
I was just going to throw in, if you have lots of data and you need it analyzed, we have students.
The other machine.
I don't want to equate students with machines, but I think students can do a better job than machines, a different type of job. Yeah. But I think that's maybe an area of collaboration, this potential, because we do have that sort of resource, and it may be a way that we can work together. Yeah. Sorry, Paul.
Thanks, Mark. I think that the greatest opportunity lies in bringing together all of the work that we do, whether we are in academic research or various branches of the sustainable building industry. Up until now, I think we've been very fragmented in what we're looking at, what direction we're pushing in, and if we focus around one thing, and and I'm going to propose that we focus around carbon. If we focus all of our efforts collectively around one task, and that is pulling down carbon and then reducing the amount of carbon we put into the atmosphere, I think if we all have that common goal, we're all going to be pulling in the same direction, and I think we might actually get somewhere. As we've touched on many times so far this evening, the problem is not technical. We all know the individual things we have to do. We just have to collaborate, bring it all together, and make sure we're traveling in the same direction.
Okay, well, Umberto's standing up behind this, so I think that's a sign that we're going to get pushed off. So I'm just going to wrap up by you've you provided a good feed for me to talk about the fact that we here are really interested in the idea of bringing together the various different strands in some sort of collaborative venture with industry, with different parts of Ryerson, into some sort of center of activity around this. So, and that's one of the objectives today, is to open up the discussion and allow others to express their interest in some form of network of collaboration. And a focus on carbon would certainly be an important and a very, well, clearly an obvious way to direct that. So I'd like to thank both Paul and to Gonzalo, and I'm going to hand it back over to Umberto, and we'll move on. Thanks very much.
So thanks, Mark, actually, for making exactly on time. I'm actually invite Seth to come to the stage. Seth is a professor in mechanical engineering department and is an also a nice way to jump from a professor in architecture into a professor of mechanical engineering that really is going to lead the discussion about energy efficiency moving forward. So Seth Rory is an associate professor in Canada Research Chair in Mechanical and Industrial Engineering. Is going to actually moderate a panel with two other speakers. There is Gary Thompson that I saw, and he's actually a supervisor in engineering at Toronto Hydro. And there is Dennis Fotino, that is president and CEO of Noventa Engineering Partners, that is just on time to stay on the stage. So Dennis, you couldn't be more actually welcome at this point. And again, you're going to have 20 minutes to navigate, again, these 5 questions. Seth?
Thank you, Umberto. And Umberto, when we're running out of time, just wave your arms, like go over to the middle and wave your arms at me, because I think if you don't do that, we could probably talk for hours. So thank you very much. My name is Seth Dworkin. I'm an associate professor here at Ryerson in mechanical engineering. And I'm interested to be here today and meet a lot of you because I do a lot of research in building energy, and my specific interests are in geothermal energy, thermal energy storage, and potentially integrating solar thermal energy into those types of systems. So I'm on the thermal side. I think the way I'd like to begin this mini panel discussion is we'll do our own introductions. So I'll ask my two panelists to do a brief introduction and maybe end your introduction with what type of technology in energy efficiency you're most interested in from the point of view or the perspective of your company. Dennis? Introduction and your most exciting technology that you're going to want to talk about on this panel, and then we'll follow up with that.
Okay. So Dennis Fotinos, I'm President and CEO of Noventa Energy Partners, which is a new startup business. Probably, I wanted to put chief cook and bottle washer, because I think that's probably the more appropriate title. My chief operating officer, Steve Condi, is with me. I tried to get him to come up here because he's the smart one, but he didn't want to come up. Nevertheless, I'll take all the credit for the good work that he and the rest of the team do at Noventa. 20 years ago, I started a company called Enwave Energy Corporation. It was a sleepy little district steam company that wasn't making a lot of money. I was appointed chairman of the board with a mandate. I was a city councilor at the time and appointed chairman of the board by Mel Lastman. And to get rid of this damn thing, it's costing us $3 million a year to wind it down and sell it. Instead, I put together a plan. I found the Omer's Pension Fund, and we decided to privatize the company, and we created Enwave Energy Corporation with a $38 million investment and sold it for $586 million to Brookfield in 2012, 2013. City did quite well. They walked away with $157 million plus $5 million annuity stream for the next 100 years. It's going up by CPI for use of lake water cooling. So it was pretty exciting. Building a project that was pioneered by some real visionaries in the city, Bob Tamblyn, Richard Gilbert, the late, great Jack Layton, who's a very good friend of mine, and being able to...
And a Ryersonian, I should add.
And a Ryersonian, yes, absolutely. But being able to give some the dreams that people had turned into reality was a real excitement. Brookfield took over the business, and they've expanded Enwave. Enwave is now a North American entity to almost a $1.4 billion corporation in 15 cities across North America. But deep lake water cooling is still unique to Toronto. And I got the bug after we sold the business. I stayed on as part of my contract with Brookfield for a couple of years. And I was itching to do something else. And I was becoming more of a finance sort of person, talking to bankers, lenders, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's not what I do, and that's not what I do well. And so I was itching to do stuff, and I keep bringing back new technologies to Brookfield Infrastructure Partners, and they're an infrastructure company, so they're not into developing new ideas from scratch. They have investors that want to get paid a recurring dividend payment or annuity. And so the interest wasn't there. So last year, I decided to venture out on my own again and put together a really great team of people that helped me achieve the success at Enwave. Steve was one of them. Not a Ryersonian, Waterloo, I think, right? That's okay, we'll forgive you. But we made up for it by hiring 2 Ryersonian engineers to work with him. And we work very closely with some of the faculty and staff here. And the cornerstone of our business became wastewater heat recovery. I was really awed by I did a lot of research and looked at the project in Vancouver, the Southeast Falls Creek project. Was really enamored by what they were able to do there early on. There's a great company out in BC called Shark that's doing some interesting things with wastewater heat recovery. But then I stumbled on this company called Huber Technology from Germany, and I was a convert. I spent a couple of weeks there learning the technology, and then we looked at it. When you see some stats coming out, like 410 billion kilowatt hours of energy being dumped into the sewers in the United States every single year, you kind of think, well, maybe if we can just take a little tiny bit of that and make it work. And we've been out pounding the pavement, working with Professor Jakminovich here at Darko at, I always get his last name wrong, he said, hope forgives me, at Ryerson, Professor Fung and the Ryerson students. And we've had tremendous interest all across Canada and the U.S. And we're now hoping to go out and do a capital raise in the spring to catapult us with that one technology. But we also have decided to commercialize other technologies, including Kelvin thermal energy, which is they hate when I call it a battery storage. It's not really battery storage, it's thermal energy storage. Takes off-peak power and stores high-grade heat in a graphite core. And we're also working with Thermonex from BC, which is an energy sharing technology within a building. And so we're bringing all these things together, coupled with geo-exchange and then working with machine learning that was discussed in the previous panel, and pulling it all together, trying to make it all work. So that's what we're all about.
So there were a few technologies mentioned there, and I'd like to get back to a few of those, but let's continue with our introduction, so thank you very much.
It's a hard lead to follow. So I'm Gary Thompson. I am a supervisor of engineering at Toronto Hydro. Not as an exciting life as Dennis here. Initially, every time I think of you, I think of, I don't know, bread and bananas and Fortinos, But anyway, yeah, hey, probably making more money too, right? So what do? The group I head at Toronto Hydro, great group of guys, made up of a lot of Ryerson grads. I am a Ryerson grad myself. But I don't blame Ryerson for the pain I inflict on them. But we touch every project, every skyscraper in the city of Toronto. We're responsible for the study, planning, and enabling of all the distributed energy resources. We have a total to date of about 2,120 of these, to a total of 230 megawatts sprinkled across the city. That in itself is great until you start to consider what happens when you start to squeeze the balloon, right? When you squeeze the balloon, squeeze it too hard, it pops. We don't want to pop the balloon. So we take great interest in how buildings are built, how they're connected. The interesting thing that stands out every time is that the infrastructure that's put in to supply these buildings, and I think I can speak about gas, I can speak about water, but more so about electricity, has not changed. Still the same sizes, the standards are still the same. And the key thing that stands out to me, and it's one or two things I want to talk about today, and one is, why are we doing that? We're building buildings, we're putting in infrastructure, and I've heard all the smart infrastructure, and trust me, we've done a bit of innovation at Toronto Hydro with Ryerson. We have the privilege of having two bits of innovation that appear nowhere else in the world that was developed in conjunction with Ryerson. but we're trying to put people into buildings that we don't know if they want to be there. We don't know what their real needs are. So we've heard talk about data analytics, and I want to explore that a bit further, and machine learning. But how does that actually contribute to us reducing our carbon footprint? How does that contribute to us being more energy efficient? One of the few things I remember from my academic years, I should be careful because I also teach here, so I hope there are no students of mine in the room. You know, efficiency is what is in over out. It's as simple as that. The out relates, I would suggest, to the occupants of the building, to the people who use it. But do we truly understand who they are, what they are, and why? So, on that point, I'll stop.
Thank you. So I don't think we're going to have time to go over all 5 questions. So I want to try to give our audience an interesting focus here. And so I'm going to ask a pointed question, and both of you will have a chance to answer. So you both have connections with Ryerson. You both have what sounds to me like a very good feeling for the innovation potential here at Ryerson, as well as the expertise. So in the area of energy efficiency, and that could be energy efficient building systems, efficient use, human behavior, mining data for energy efficient ideas, et cetera, anything that relates to the energy efficient use of buildings. In that area, where do you see the potential benefit with industry Ryerson connections that are not yet formed? Where do you think we could leverage our student power, the knowledge and expertise of our faculty, and combine that with folks like yourselves who have your ear to the ground in industry and see what needs to be done? So I want to challenge you now to think about energy efficient technologies and how we can partner in order to advance those. Who would like to go first? And do you need a glass of wine before you answer?
One of the things I really appreciate with Ryerson over the years, and we've worked with a number of other academic institutions, not to compare them, is because Ryerson has a flair of bringing various focuses together. I think here, when I talk about human behavior, the technology idea, so you talk about your thermal and your PV and everything else, and we know what the technology looks like. We know what it looks like. It was said in the previous panel. However, what we don't have are learning models, not just models. Because today we develop mathematical models of things, but they're static. I'm referring to learning models. So I got this Fitbit, Father's Day. My daughters decided, Dad, you need to really get out there. So we're going to give you something that talks to you. Well, this thing tells me how I slept. It tells me what my heart rate is. It tells me, sometimes it tells me too much. But could that information, instead of annoying me, be put to contribute to a developing model? That model is embedded in technology. And therein lies the true energy efficiency. Because at night when you go to sleep and your body temperature varies, that ties back to the heat or the cooling that comes into your space. And that manages it. So now you're not just blasting for something you set on your thermostat at 20 degrees. Maybe your body, maybe you had too much wine the night before. So your body is calling for 15 degrees. Now, the difference between 15 degrees and 20 degrees is a lot, especially if you sleep for 8 hours. That is the true challenge of energy efficiency.
Innovative interconnectivity of information between, I love it, it's fantastic. I'm not the right person to partner with in the room for that, but I'm sure that that's going to spur some interesting
Well, you have,
conversation.
you know, I spent all a Saturday here, you know, to the side. My daughter wants to do social work, but I was impressed. When I came here, social work wasn't that big, but I was impressed with your psychology, your arts, your early childhood. Here lies, you have the tools to do that. So what do? We need to get the people together, get them talking around what do you have, what do you have? Bring it together. And at the end of the day, have developers, and this is where the industry comes in, have developers who are willing to offer their places as living labs.
Thank you. Now, Dennis, I want to put the same question to you. And you had mentioned earlier in your introduction about your interest in all of the potential for waste heat, for like sewage you were talking about, and those types of things. So I don't know if you want to discuss technologies which can be disruptive in that area or a different area. But I want to put the same question to you. Where can partnership with university, with Ryerson, really start to change things?
So you're going to have to indulge me because I'm not an engineer, I'm a political scientist. So I'm going to have to start with a quote that was an inspirational quote for me. Robert Kennedy Jr., some people see things as they are and wonder, ask why. I dream of things that never were and ask why not. And so I think that really, and that's paraphrasing, and he did a much better job with it. You know, I think there was a recent article in the Globe and Mail that talked about the challenge that we face as Canadians. And the biggest challenge we face, it's about 3 weeks ago, I wish I'd kept it, but if you look it up, we don't innovate. We've stopped innovating. And if there's going to be something that's going to be a downfall or a detriment to our society is the lack of innovation. And I think what my experience has been in partnering with Ryerson is we bring the innovation back to the table. And that was why I decided to chart out on my own again. It was less to do about sewer heat recovery, and one of the cornerstones and platforms of Noventa is that we are technology agnostic. So we approach a problem with a totally blank slate and ask why not. And we look at it and we go back to first principles, and rather than taking the traditional approach, you're going to design a building, it's going to have a boiler, it's going to have a chiller, it's going to have fan coils, it's going to have conventional equipment, we say, what sources of energy are available first within the area outside of mechanical cooling? So whether it's sewer heat recovery, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, whether it's whatever other source, lake water, you know, what are the natural renewable sources that are available? How can we leverage those? How do we bring those to bear? And then how do we layer in the conventional stuff that we don't want to use, but we have to until we get to the stage where we can be net zero. And I think what's to me what's exciting about Ryerson is that of all, and I'm sure all the universities, because I also participate at U of T, and there's a lot of talent amongst a lot of our Canadian students, but it's the opportunity to bring in untainted minds, the opportunity to bring in students who ask why not, and that to me is so exciting. So we're looking at wastewater heat recovery, and Steve, first thing he said, well, we've got 2 Ryerson students working with us, and one of the challenges is you got all this heat coming in the winter. That's wonderful. You can use the heat in the winter when you've got 25-degree sewage that you can do something with. But what do you do with it in the summer? He pipes up and says, well, what about incorporating a Stirling engine? What if we try to make a Stirling engine work? And then the students, their eyes popped out of their head. Oh, yeah. And then the other guy pops up and says, well, you know, there's a company that in Switzerland called Friotherm, and they do like, they start talking about stuff that's way beyond my capacity of understanding, but just the excitement and the innovation, and that's what is going to drive us, I think, as a company to success, and that's what Ryerson brings to the table. you can market that, and if you can get these students, and I agree with what you said, not just engineering students, but implement the ideal model. You know, there's if you ever Google ABC Nightline, it's a 1990 show, and the ideal, IDEO, the company, the industrial design company, it's a great 10-minute documentary. I show it to every new employee that comes in my company at Enwave, and I'm going to start doing it at Noventa. And there's a group of people that work together. Some are teachers, doctors, lawyers, engineers, and their task is to build a shopping cart. And they do it, and it's the collaboration is incredible. And it's you watch that 10-minute excerpt, and you think, wow. And that's what we have at Noventa right now because of Ryerson. Because, you know, we can't, a week doesn't pass by that between Alan Fung and Darko Joksimovic, we don't get another. We're participating in smart solar buildings. We're participating in fuel switching, cloud-based fuel switching technology. We're working to develop an app for carbon trading. We're Umberto's, I think he recently sent me another collaboration effort. It's fantastic. And, you know, we're still focusing, but we work on the 20% rule. 80% of the time is spent on objectives of the company. 20%, every one of our employees takes a project on, and it becomes their 20%. It becomes their Gmail, just like the Caribou project at Google that created Gmail. It's their 20%. So all these projects, Ryerson, bring them on. We love it. We're bringing more Ryerson students. It's fantastic.
Thank you. We're just about out of time. That was a great, I think, closing. Dennis, Gary, I want to give you one more chance if there's anything you want to add in terms of needs of Toronto Hydro, where you're going now in sustainable energy and sustainable building technology, and specifically with energy efficiency. What's the next big thing we're going to see? I'll give you the final word.
Well, we don't have the privilege that Dennis has in the fact that we live in a very, very regulated space. Everything we do, there is a rule. I have the book in my office. Guy comes in, he asks a question, I flip the page, there is a rule. Okay? Separate and apart from that, what is now beginning to happen because of the what I would call the success of the feed-in tariff program. I mean, when you consider that in 2009 we probably had a couple dozen solar sites. Now, solar alone, we're looking at about 1,900 between 2009 and 2017. There is a move on in that space to think innovatively, to look at regulation, to give the people who play in the regulated energy space bandwidth to now begin to, I mean, it always was there. We had the Smart Grid Fund, you know, we have federal funds and everything else. But now people are beginning to think outside of money. They're beginning to think. And then what I find exciting and what I see as the future is that those thoughts, we're going to turn it. That it won't be the funds that drive the thought. It'll be the thought that drives the funds. And that will, so with those thoughts, which come out of collaboration with places like the Center for Urban Energy, which is probably one of the most amazing developments for this city. It's something that this city has to be proud of, by the way. The guys over there do a tremendous job, and they really put sustainability and energy efficiency on the map for Ryerson. With that type of work, then you're going to now start to see a lot bigger things. I mean, as the fair says, the possibilities are endless.
All right, thank you. I want to thank our two panelists, and I guess we're out of time, and we'll move to our next one.
Thanks, Seth and the panelists for being on time. Actually, we are going very well, honestly. I need to be honest, I'm surprised. My job is extremely simple tonight. So I'm going to actually call the third panel. Jen McCarter will moderate. She's a prof in this department, and she's probably the best person in this department I can think really to moderate a panel about smart buildings. So we are actually getting into panel number 3 that is going to be moderated by Jen, and we are going to have 2 people. There is actually change into the program. Casey, founder of Viacom, was supposed to be with us. He couldn't make, so he apologized. But he managed actually to kind of convince Dimitri to move towards Ryerson. So Dimitri will be actually sitting on the panel on behalf of Rycom. So Dimitri, please.
Great. Come on up. I thought I'd mix it up by sitting over here. So come on up for top.
And Pradap from Schneider Electric, another long-lasting kind of friend of Ryerson, will provide a kind of a complementing side picture when it comes actually to electronic systems in buildings.
All right.
We have a presentation now.
I think we're just going to keep with, we were just talking before, I think we're just going to keep this as a backdrop because I think we've got a lot more interesting things to say and some exciting things to say. I want to start by thanking Gary and Gonzalo for setting us up so perfectly. They keep talking about machine learning and integration and smart systems. This is exactly what this panel is about. And for those of you who don't know what smart means, I think a lot of us think of smart as energy efficiency, and I'm actually going to use this as a prop. It's one of the reasons I wanted to sit here. Is that if you look at the OBPRI banner and some of the Ryerson research strengths, I think we think of energy efficiency as a major reason of doing smart buildings. But if you look at how buildings actually perform in real life, a lot of times you'll get a building that's designed to have a really high performance, but people are uncomfortable, people don't feel great in the building. One of the facility engineers overrules the system to make people happier, healthier, and have better well-being. Well, a smart building can balance energy in a way that actually achieves the well-being. So you can actually balance how you're operating all of your different systems. You can take advantage of all the digital media technology we have, all of the innovation, and smart buildings, smart transportation, smart neighborhoods, smart cities, and the smart campus, which is something we're trying to establish here at Ryerson, actually addresses the whole bottom part. How can cities be run in a way that actually enhances city building and social justice? How can we make smarter schools that are better places to learn and teach? How can we make buildings more commercially successful by actually leveraging and integrating all of these different systems? So rather than working in these different silos, we can actually integrate. And I really see that as one of the big benefits, and I think that I've got a really great panel tonight to really talk about that. So I want to make this a bit more of a kind of a popcorn panel, so we're going to keep our answers a little bit short, because I actually want to get through the 5 questions, because they were mine. So the first question is, and I think this is a really great way of introducing yourself. I'll start with Pratap, and we'll kind of go back and forth. But tell me a little bit about your role at Schneider, but also about what you think is the most interesting, exciting thing that's happening right now, that especially from Schneider's perspective, you're seeing in the market.
Perfect. So my name is Pratap Reburu, and I worked actually in various sort of domains inside Schneider Electric. More in the energy side, on smart grid side, and also energy efficiency, and also working very recently on IoT platforms. So that's my background. As you know, Schneider is sort of having different business units. One is on the building side, the other one is on the energy side, and also we have IT side and also industry. So we actually have a very great focus on buildings, what we can do in the buildings. And right now, what to your question, what is happening is actually connected things. That's what is happening. There are a lot of technologies which are really emphasizing that we can go and do the buildings which can be connected.
Great, thank you, Pratap. So Demetrius, tell me about Rycom. What do you see as the most exciting thing that's happening right now from your perspective, and where do you guys fit into that?
So my name is Demetrius, obviously. My group at Rycom deals with designing technology solutions specifically to the large buildings that you see downtown. Someone was talking about how we're building them high as opposed to horizontally. And what we do is we actually go in, we're technology agnostic. We go in and we look for business problems specifically as they're related to sustainability. Could be smart. We help our clients build a strategy that they're going to execute against over the next 3 to 5 years. But the most exciting thing that I'm seeing is that I deal with a lot of the investment side of the business, is that the investors are actually asking questions about what are our sustainability plans, how does SMART fit into that? Are we purchasing the right things? What are we doing with the data? Someone mentioned the data. And that's very odd for me, having somebody sit across the table from me that is mostly an investor that deals with sort of spreadsheets, ask those questions. So that actually is one of the most exciting things for me.
Great. So we've got a little bit of the business change and the social change. And I guess what are the biggest opportunities that you see? And we'll start actually with you this time, Demetrius.
There's tons of opportunities. So we take a very pragmatic approach to smart, if you will. Energy, from a business perspective, we look at is low-hanging fruit, right? Getting in, trying to save some energy. But we want to take a look at the property. We want to take a look at the portfolios from a holistic perspective. I'm not sure if all of you are aware, but a site like a building downtown could spend $3 or $4 million on cleaning supplies, toilet paper, and that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of wastage. So how are they leveraging the data that's in the building, or can we create a solution that's going to get them the data to start to make better decisions? For example, everybody knows some of the large malls in Toronto. You know, they have 3 crews a day that are walking around to every washroom that are cleaning them, putting toilet paper in, changing garbages. We know they're changing the garbages when they're not full. So is that a productive use of their time? Is it better to send them to an area that actually requires a garbage being changed? How's a building being occupied? How are people using it? We work for the feds, and they're actually telling us that they're oversubscribed, which means they have too many buildings by 40%. So, you know, sustainability is really, from our perspective, a holistic approach to all of the information that a building is providing.
And for that?
Okay, so I think, no, in my view, actually, there are 4 things very, very interesting for us to know. The first thing is, by 2020, somewhere around 50 billion sort of objects will be connected inside the buildings or inside everywhere, wherever you see. So this is where the change is happening, and which means you have a lot of data which is available. So the technology is there. Now what we can do and how we can actually use that data. And the second thing is the investment side. If you think of the investment, more and more investment from now to 2040, somewhere around 80% of the investment is going to be on the green side, green energy side. So everyone is actually working towards how they can actually reduce the carbon footprint. The third one is actually the rise of the prosumer. I guess you would have heard about, people can actually today, inside the building, they can actually generate the energy. It is not only actually, as a building consuming energy. So the question of, somebody supplying, somebody is actually, giving the demand is gone. So which means actually the same building, they are becoming actually, producers of energy. So that means actually they are becoming sort of produce and consume. And the fourth one is actually a digital twin. So which means actually you can sort of create a physical object, what you see inside the building, as a digital object, which means you can see what is happening inside the building sitting somewhere.
Great. So you mentioned 50 billion IoT connected devices. Are there challenges associated with the scale? Like, I'm trying to get a sense of, from your perspective, what are the big challenges that we have to address?
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge is actually not getting the data. Once you get the data, how you can analyze, what sort of analytics you can actually build, and also what sort of infrastructure you need to actually get that data and make some meaningful sort of information.
I'm actually going to make this, I'm going to feed Pratap the second half of the question, because we're actually really fortunate at Ryerson is that Schneider actually in December made a $1 million donation to our Smart Building Analytics Living Lab. And I know we're very excited to have that as an area of connection. And I was wondering what other kind of research challenges you see as an issue there. Don't worry, Demetrius, I'll get to you too.
Yeah. So I think the Smart Building Analytics Living Lab. So there are 5 technologies which is actually happening right now, which is available today. The first one is the IoT. The second one is the mobility, right? Now everybody wants actually where you can see the data, what analytics you can see on your mobile phone, right? That is the second one. The third one is actually cybersecurity. once you have the data, you need to understand actually how you can do the cybersecurity. And the other one is the cloud. And then that's where I think we need to manage all the technologies so that you get a meaningful data, so that you can utilize and make people. So at the end of the day, what is more important to us, the occupants are engaged and they're comfortable.
Thank you, Pratap. Now, Demetrius, when you look at the market and you look at what you're trying to achieve at RICOM in these larger buildings, what are some of the challenges, whether they're technical or whether they're social and political or even just economic? And how do you see research playing a role in terms of whether there are existing collaborations or potential future collaborations here at Ryerson?
So I'm a propeller head by nature. So I'm a tech head. I hear all this machine learning and AI. And I think from our perspective, we start looking at research, and we do hire a number of engineers. When we look at research, we look at how do we codify what's actually happening in the field. So they have operators, facility managers that are running the building. It's interesting, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, that 80% of their job is making sure the systems are running. Now that's 20% of their job. So for us, the research side is how do we codify, the things that they do on a daily basis, and how do we actually get to the point where we can automate? I don't know if the mic's going off and on, but is the mic going off and on? Yeah? I have a big voice, so I don't need the mic necessarily. So, are we good? So from our perspective, the research component is...
Let me use my microphone just because we're broadcasting.
Okay. So from my perspective, the area for us that is going to be most important is how do we actually start to, and I don't want to say teach the machines, but at least codify the rule sets and get to the command and control so we can remove some of the mistakes like leaving the lights on or setting the temperature higher because the tenant is complaining and then forgetting about it. We call it set and forget. I'm pretty sure everybody in the industry has heard that before. So that's really where we see research and development. I think Dennis mentioned something very interesting. The 80-20 rule for all companies, 80% of our time is also how do we commercialize the solutions that we're driving. But 20%, I don't call it innovation, I call it experimenting. What are we actually seeing in the data? Maybe there's some new things that we haven't sort of compartmentalized or sort of taken away from being compartmentalized. Like security, how does it impact? So from our perspective, it's really getting creative people to come in and ask the question, not just why not, but what is this telling me? Is it something that I can see differently than I haven't seen before?
We're just going to play musical microphones for a little bit while we get this going. So as we look kind of towards the future, we're in a place where I think we're going to have an enormous change in the next, Canada, we start to see carbon pricing, we start to see this change in the real estate market, and whether provincially we're on board or not, it looks like there's things that are coming, and the market is starting to respond. In light of that, what do you think the role is going to be for smart technologies and these connected technologies? Do you think it's a big part of the solution or a small part, or do you think that it's an enabling technology that'll help us to actually do even a different or out-of-the-box approach?
So for me, I think it's very, very interesting thing what is happening today, because we have identified how we can actually save the planet, right? So that is the first thing. And then the second thing is, what is the change, the trends, the mega trends? One is actually we call urbanization. So somewhere around 2.5 billion people. Hello? Yeah. 2.5 billion people are going to be actually moving towards cities. So which means the smart buildings becomes a necessity. It is not like a choice or no option for us. It has to be a smart building. And then in smart building, what we think of in Schneider is actually three things. So one is actually smart energy, smart water, and also smart building, and then smart integration. So you can have all the silos, but unless otherwise you integrate, the result will not be actually what is desired. So the outcome is actually what we see is actually how we can integrate and make sure that it is working together. And then the other one is actually industrialization, right? So we are getting more and more energy spent. So again, we need to understand actually how we can consume less and how we can make these buildings energy efficient.
Great. Thank you, Pratap. Demetrius?
So I think, and I warned Umberto that if I ever got to talk in front of you guys that it might be a problem, but I think that I'm hearing some really good things in the industry about collaboration, getting different industries together, working together, you know, not being so guarded about what they're doing, you know, all sort of paddling in the right direction. But I think we have a couple of problems, and the first problem is that in Canada, if you look globally, our energy is pretty cheap. So there's no real incentive to actually do the right thing. And I mean that sincerely when I say do the right thing. And so when I look at IoT and I look at the technologies, you know, our biggest challenge right now in the industry, and will be for the next 3 to 5 years, is how do we make it cost neutral? How do we make a business or a property owner want to do the right thing by showing them that there's value associated with their actions? That, you know, they can spend $1 but save $1, and then down the road they can spend $1 and save $1.50. So I think more so than the technology, because it's going to increase year after year after year. It's getting better, it's getting faster, it's getting smarter. I think more it's about the adoption rate and educating the market. That's, to me, what I think as a group we need to have to really consider. Because I talk to people and they say, you know, it sounds like a really good idea, but I don't have it in my budget. You know, I've got to asphalt a parking lot, as a prime example. Or I've got to spend $1 million in putting flowers in front of my beautiful building every year. So it's really getting out there and explaining how the technologies that are coming out, they're all good, I'm sure of it, but how it's going to impact their business and how they actually don't have to, you know, de-risk the investment, if you will.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I see Umberto starting to slowly make his way up, so, but I think I have another minute to make some closing remarks. It's interesting because I know we talk about, yeah, Canada has some of the cheapest energy in the world, and it's that 330-300 rule, right? For every square foot, or say 3,300, 3,000 to make it metric. Every square meter of corporate real estate space will be $30 a year in electricity, $300 in rent, and $3,000 in salary. And it winds up being a very small piece of the pie. So it might be just simply changing the way that we're speaking, trying to figure out how we can communicate the real value of it. In some of the talks I've had recently with real estate owners, actually a really big driver is the tenants. The tenants might want to be in an energy efficient space above and beyond the financial savings because they recognize that you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. And I think it ties.
Leeds is an example of that. Leeds, the tenants wrote it into their contract, so the property owners had to deal with it.
Exactly. So yeah, exactly. And it's that sort of thing, and then trying to shift. And I think as occupants, I think even every single person here who has any sort of occupied space, we have the opportunity to be that voice of the occupant, pushing to be prosumers, as Pratap put it, rather than consumers. And I think that there's a lot of the social drive that comes behind it, that it's not just a technical solution. It was a technical solution we would have solved a long time ago. But I think that as we start to realize and adapt, and I think one of the big opportunities we have on this campus is we have a couple of teaching buildings coming up, in the sense that the buildings themselves are designed to really communicate. So the Center for Urban Innovation and the Daphne Cockwell Complex both have these extra pieces that can actually display the energy efficiency. We can gamify some of it. We can really teach people and engage people. And I think that by leveraging a lot of this interconnectedness, we've got some really great opportunities. So thank you so much, both of you. I think between the two of you gave us a really great perspective on this.
Thank you. Thank you. So, thanks, Jennifer, and thanks actually the panelists. The third panel was perfectly on time, so we're moving actually ending towards the fourth and last panel. I'm actually asking Jocelyn to come on the stage, and she is the applied chemistry person for CLC Silicons, and then we're going to have Mike in representing the Environmental Commission of Ontario. And the topic of the fourth panel, which unfortunately for you, I have the honor and the obligation to kind of moderate, it's going to be about resilient building. And the reality, this panel was supposed to be moderated by our president, that for those of you that do not know him, is also a Canada Research Chair and works on sustainable concrete. And one of the reasons why we decided to end with this kind of topic is because you probably have seen towards the course of tonight a lot of discussion about active system, a lot of discussion about
kind of smart, innovative aspects of buildings. But then we also realized that a lot of time our buildings are, at the end of the day, materials. So the cities is done actually by materials. So we ended decided that it was probably worth it to finish with a panel that on one side is going to touch a bit of material, but on the other side is touching actually the governor and the regulators. Because the reality is that the industry is heavily kind of based on rules and policies and laws. And so, all the things we have heard are perfect, makes perfect sense from a business point of view, but at the end of the day, we need actually to have the public face at the same table to make these kind of things happen. And so I'm going to actually move toward the panel, and let me actually use the microphone. So I'm not going to actually present myself. I think actually you had enough for me. And so I'm going to actually start from Jocelyn for gender balance aspects. And I'm going to ask her, what do you see as the most innovative aspect in material research looking forward? How do you see that, your personal experience in your company can change the way in which we build buildings?
Hi, so I'm Jocelyn Johansson. I work with CSL Silicones. I'm actually an applied research chemist that works on new product development. And my primary focus over the last 5 years has been on developing air and water barrier systems, from coatings to flashings to membranes of different sorts. So that's where that's my material side of things. In terms of some opportunities and some exciting things that are going on in my world, we are looking a lot at looking at environmental. There's no way you can get around working with coatings and not looking at VOCs. So our company focuses a lot on solvent-free formulations with aspirations of working towards water-based products. We are also focusing on eventually looking towards prefabricated materials, so fast curing products that you can make in a factory, and do modular building as well. We're also looking at functional materials, where you can look right down to the polymer and designing it for specific applications and targeting specific functionalities. So going from a very science-based approach and doing some investigations which look at an objective and scientific approach to providing solutions to the building challenges, and having a way in which you can sort of cut through the marketing jargon and come out with some truth to the people that you're facing, whether it's a building designer or an architect or a contractor, and providing them with some concrete facts which will help them in whatever their approach is.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Mike, if you don't mind, I'm going to slightly change the question, because what Jocelyn hasn't told you is that a significant portion of the company works actually internationally. So we started this panel today, tonight, speaking about how much sustainability is local. And through the day, we also figured out that a lot of times kind of Canadian companies are not that much innovative, but then we have quite good, unique opportunity to start actually looking how some companies have been able to kind of get into the innovation world and getting beyond innovation world. Now, the topic of this panel is about resilience. And one of the aspects of resilience is that you need to start forecasting. And when you start forecasting, you need to start really kind of open your mind what other people have been doing, what other codes have been doing. So, Mike, if you don't mind, how do you see our policy in Toronto and Ontario compared with the rest of the world? And do you think actually that we are leveraging enough knowledge from the rest of the world? And are we really opening our mind to the rest of the world opportunities that are actually there?
Okay, thanks very much, Umberto. Very broad question there. Just as an intro, so I'm from the Environmental Commission of Ontario, so not really an industry representative. Our product is reports to the Ontario Legislature, so reporting on their progress on how they're doing in reducing energy use and adapting and mitigating against climate change. So quite different lens there than most of the other panelists there. So how innovative are we in Toronto and Ontario versus the rest of the world? Let's take resilience as an example, and that I think Toronto in particular has done some things recently which are, quite leading edge and looking at bringing resilience into buildings. So looking at the Toronto Green Standard, for example, some of the changes that have come to the latest version, looking at this concept of a resilient building has to do more in the event of a power outage than simply allow people to get out of the building safely. A resilient building should be one where they can live in comfort and stay there, for several days. And so the Toronto Green Standard has kind of brought that, mainstreamed that concept in terms of policy codes. So that's now in there as a voluntary Tier 2 measure, which I think is, quite innovative there. And so looking at how do we make those buildings resilient in terms of smart passive design, some thermal storage, and then probably a broader role for on-site energy generation and sort of integrating those elements. So certainly in that aspect, I would say that Toronto's been a leader in resilience. Take one other example, is the area of climate data and sort of where we're going for what we think future climate will look like. I would say there that Quebec in particular has done a much better job so far in Ontario. They've set up sort of an independent organization to work on climate data and to provide, more local and regional analysis of future climate impacts. And so I think something like that would be useful to have in Ontario, because it's obviously difficult to build a resilient building if you don't know what environmental building conditions you're going to be designing for. So I think certainly better climate modeling would help for Ontario.
Jocelyn, just actually adding on it, how do you see the market internationally versus the market in Canada?
A lot of what we look at in terms of differences in different parts of the world is what are their building products, what are their building materials. Here, we focus a lot on building with gypsum sheathing, whereas down in various parts of South America, there's a lot more concrete-based construction. So as for CSL, we're really working towards our growth in South American markets. So while we are also looking at meeting the Canadian standards for against the National Building Code through the Canadian Construction Materials Centre, which is recognized worldwide, particularly in South America. So we focus on targeting our products not only for within the Canadian market, but also within other parts of the world.
Okay, I'm going to actually try to angle differently, but the same question, and is basically going beyond what people think about sustainable buildings. One of the kind of challenge looking at this topic tonight is probably that you really can look at this topic from a lot of different angles. It could be a financial angle, it could be a technical angle, it could be a social aspect. And the reality is that all these kind of things are working together. So my provocative question could be, in reality, how do we leverage opportunity to have different people working together where they really come from different background? I want to actually, if you have any example recently in the last, 6 months, where you have seen, your perspective really facing a huge challenge when it deals with touching these topics with another person that has completely different approach looking at resilience buildings.
I can give one example, which I think is quite interesting recently. So that's the Electra Powerhouse project. So some of you may have heard of that. It's an integration of solar and battery storage at the residential home level. The interesting thing that was done with that project, though, was sort of looking at how do we evaluate the different benefit streams that different parties might get? So looking at the customer perspective, but then the utility perspective. So solar without storage doesn't give the individual homeowner much or any resilience, but yet storage is quite expensive. So from the homeowner's perspective, they're not typically interested in purchasing that. So what this pilot did is basically they subsidized the cost of the battery storage, guaranteed the homeowner sort of the ability to keep a block of that storage and dedicate it to sort of emergency loads. And then in return, the utility is allowed to operate sort of the battery, cycle that and use the power flow how they want. So they can determine whether the power goes back into the grid, whether the battery or the grid powers the homeowner. And it turns out there's real benefits from that from the utilities perspective. If it's scaled up, and you would have thousands of these systems, there are a lot of opportunities for utilities to reduce those infrastructure costs. So you could see a future model where, part of the cost is paid by the utility, part of the cost is paid by homeowners. So it's how do we capture, when you've got a product, how do you capture multiple value streams, to perhaps make a better business case for those products by sort of allocating the costs and benefits better.
Jocelyn?
Well, I can sort of speak to CSL's relationships with with different universities and colleges. Even just starting from a personal perspective, I have a PhD in synthetic inorganic chemistry, but here I am speaking at a sustainable building discussion group. So for any of the students in the room, keep your minds open to the places where you can go with whatever your specific degree is and where you may end up. So CSL really is very welcoming of the concept of working with interdisciplinary groups, whether it's within industry or within academia. So this is actually the beginning of our relationship with Ryerson. It's my first time on the Ryerson campus. But we've done other work with Brock University and George Brown College, and we've initiated conversations with BCIT, University of Waterloo, University of Guelph. So, and in various departments, whether it's a chemistry department or an architectural department or building science department. So we really see benefits to the company from looking at our research from various angles that can help us grow, whether it's within increasing the productivity of our manufacturing and to gathering information about the performance of our materials. So one of the challenges we see as being we're a small company entering into the building sciences as really a new area for us. So one of the challenges is creating the awareness around our product and going out and sort of promoting the fact that we are something different, changing the minds of whether it's architects or designers or contractors about the fact that there are other technologies out there. And one of the advantages of working with students, whether it's in universities or colleges, is being able to introduce new concepts, new technologies at the beginning of their education and careers. And it allows us to sort of get the word out and open some minds about some interesting aspects. So for us, the interdisciplinary focus has been very much so with academia.
Thank you, Jocelyn. I can see. So I will probably kind of call the end for this panel, basically because this will allow us to get closer to the QA, and I think actually that will allow us to kind of mix in a bit of an informal way. We have wine waiting for us outside, we have food waiting for us outside, and I think actually that is a key aspect of this event tonight. It's not just for the panel people to speak, but even to interact in an informal way. So I'm actually gonna thank the two panelists for the first panel. gonna give the word to Philip for some concluding remarks. And I mean, we made sure that we had half of the wine and food waiting for us at the end of this evening. So basically, the idea is that after Philip has kind of given you some good, great suggestion, we can actually move outside in the outro. Thank you.
Thank you, Umberto. I'm Philip Nguyen. I'm a research proposal facilitator in the Office of the Vice President, Research and Innovation. And again, on behalf of the OVPRI, we'd really like to thank everyone for attending tonight. Thank you to our academic leads. Thank you to our panelists. So before we move on, as Umberto said, to the informal networking portion tonight, we'd like to sort of call attention to our team. Do we have the... Okay, here. So as Jen mentioned in the opening, our team is made up of a number of advisors and facilitators, and we are here to really help researchers and industry representatives across the pipeline of applied research. So please, I think there are a few of us here tonight. Please, can we raise our hands? Please find us and come talk to us with any questions you may have. Also here tonight, we have representatives from our funding agencies, our federal and provincial funding agencies. So we have someone from NSERC in the room, Ontario Centres of Excellence, and also MyTax. So again, please feel free to contact or approach these people and talk about all the various funding opportunities available. You know, we talked a lot about the challenges and opportunities to collaborate, and again, we really need this sort of consistent funding and platforms to do that. So we do have some collateral at, outside in the reception area. And again, I want to thank everyone for being here, and we have one very important final announcement to make. It is our MC's birthday today. So we'd like to just all join in wishing him a very happy birthday, and thank you for spending your birthday with us. Thank you very much.